The birthday candles flickered like tiny amber flames against the dimmed lights of Meridian Bistro, casting dancing shadows across my husband's face as I prepared to deliver what I thought would be the perfect punchline. Adrien sat there in his pressed button-down shirt, looking uncomfortable as always when attention focused on him, while our extended family gathered around the mahogany table laden with overpriced appetizers and wine glasses that caught the restaurant's ambient lighting. "So, Adrien thinks we should renovate the kitchen this year," I announced to the table, my voice carrying that particular tone I'd perfected over our 9 years of marriage, the one that suggested I was about to share something amusing at his expense. But honestly, we don't actually listen to him when it comes to big decisions. I mean, let's be real here. I make all the important choices in our household. The laughter that followed felt intoxicating. My sister-in-law Sabine nearly choked on her Chardonnay, while my mother Judith nodded approvingly from across the table. Even Adrien's normally reserved brother Marcus cracked a smile. The attention, the validation, the way everyone looked at me like I was this confident, take-charge woman who had everything under control. It was exactly what I craved. "Poor Adrien doesn't get a vote," I continued, riding the wave of amusement. "It's like having a very tall, very quiet roommate who occasionally offers opinions about home improvement projects." More laughter rippled around the table. I felt powerful, witty, completely in command of the moment. This was my element, being the center of attention, the one with the clever observations and the sharp tongue that could turn any gathering into my personal stage. But as the candle smoke began to curl upward and the laughter gradually died down, I caught sight of Adrien's expression. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't even looking embarrassed or annoyed, which would have been his typical response to my public teasing. Instead, he sat perfectly still, his hazel eyes fixed on me with an intensity I'd never seen before. There was something calculating in that gaze, something that made my stomach flutter with unexpected unease. His silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only seconds. The rest of the family had moved on to other conversations, but Adrien continued to stare at me with those unblinking eyes, as if he was memorizing every detail of this moment, filing it away somewhere deep and methodical in that analytical mind of his. "Adrien," I said, forcing a laugh, "Earth to my husband. You're being weird." He blinked once, slowly, then reached for his water glass. "Just thinking," he said quietly, his voice so calm it was almost unsettling. "Just processing." The way he said processing sent an inexplicable chill down my spine. Adrien worked as a court stenographer and part-time data analyst. His entire professional life revolved around recording details, identifying patterns, building comprehensive records of events. Suddenly, I had the strangest feeling that he was applying those same skills to our marriage, to this moment, to me. "Processing what?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light and dismissive. "Nothing important," he replied, but his eyes never left my face. "Just making mental notes." The rest of the evening passed normally enough. We sang Happy Birthday. He blew out his candles. We shared the overpriced chocolate cake that Sabine had ordered special. But I couldn't shake the image of Adrien's expression during my little performance. That cold, analytical stare that seemed to see right through me. Later that night, as we drove home through the quiet suburban streets, I tried to bring it up casually. "You seemed a little off tonight. Everything okay?" "Fine," he said, his hand steady on the steering wheel. "Just tired." But when we got home and I went upstairs to check on our 7-year-old daughter Isla, I noticed the soft glow of Adrien's laptop screen emanating from his home office. Through the partially open door, I could see him hunched over the keyboard, typing with the same focused intensity he brought to his court transcription work. Curiosity got the better of me. I crept closer, trying to catch a glimpse of what had captured his attention so completely at nearly midnight. The screen showed what looked like a spreadsheet, with columns of dates and detailed text entries. I couldn't make out most of the content from my angle, but I could clearly see my name in the header, Calanthe Behavioral Documentation. My blood ran cold. What the hell was he documenting about my behavior? And why did seeing my full name, Calanthe, spelled out so formally in that clinical-looking document, make me feel like a specimen under a microscope? I backed away from the door before he could notice me, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and something that felt uncomfortably like fear. Who did he think he was? Keeping some kind of record about me. What right did he have to analyze and document my actions like I was one of his court cases? But even as indignation flared in my chest, I couldn't quite suppress the nagging worry that maybe, just maybe, I had pushed things too far tonight. Maybe that moment at dinner, when I'd so casually dismissed him in front of his entire family, had been the final straw in some calculation I didn't even know he was making. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling while Adrien's typing continued to echo softly from down the hall, I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. So what if he was keeping notes? He was probably just venting his frustrations in some pathetic digital diary. It wasn't like he would ever actually do anything with whatever he was writing down there. After all, this was Adrien, quiet, passive, accommodating Adrien, who had spent 9 years letting me make all the decisions, set all the boundaries, control all the narratives. He was a court stenographer, for crying out loud. His job was literally to sit silently and record other people's drama. The idea that he might be planning some kind of retaliation was almost laughable. Almost. But as sleep finally began to claim me, I couldn't quite shake the memory of those cold, analytical eyes studying my face across the birthday table, or the sound of his fingers moving across the keyboard with such methodical precision. For the first time in our marriage, I found myself wondering what exactly was going on behind that quiet, observant facade, and whether I really wanted to know the answer. The next few weeks passed in what I thought was blissful normalcy, but looking back now, I realize they were actually the calm before a storm I never saw coming. I continued with my usual routines, managing our household finances, making social plans without consulting Adrien, redirecting his mail to my personal email account so I could handle important correspondence more efficiently. These weren't malicious acts in my mind, they were simply the natural order of our relationship. I was good at managing details, and he was good at other things, quieter things. What I didn't realize was that Adrien had begun treating our marriage like one of his court cases, methodically documenting every interaction with the same precision he brought to recording legal proceedings. While I went about my daily life, secure in my role as the decision-maker and household manager, he was building a comprehensive timeline of what he was apparently categorizing as a pattern of controlling behavior. The first sign that something had shifted came when I tried to access our joint savings account online and discovered that the password had been changed. I called Adrien at work, irritated by what I assumed was some kind of technical glitch. "Hey, I can't get into the savings account," I said when he answered his phone. "Did you change the password or something?" "I updated the security settings," he replied in that same calm, measured tone he'd been using since his birthday. "I'll give you the new information when I get home." "Why didn't you tell me you were doing that?" I asked, my irritation growing. "I manage our finances, remember? I need access to those accounts." "You manage some of our finances," he corrected quietly. "We both have equal rights to the accounts." The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, so legally precise, sent that same uncomfortable chill down my spine that I'd felt at the restaurant. This wasn't like Adrien. He didn't usually assert himself about financial matters, or really any matters for that matter. He certainly didn't speak to me in that cool, professional tone he reserved for his court work. "Are you seriously going to make this difficult?" I asked. "I have bills to pay, Adrien. I can't wait until you decide to come home and graciously grant me access to our own money." The bills can wait a few hours, he said. I'll be home by 6. He hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. In 9 years of marriage, Adrien had never hung up on me. He'd never denied me access to anything, never questioned my financial management, never spoken to me with such detached formality. It was like talking to a stranger who happened to share his voice. When he did come home that evening, he handed me a printed sheet with the new account information, but something about the interaction felt different. He watched me with those same analytical eyes I'd noticed at his birthday dinner, as if he was studying my reaction and filing it away for future reference. Is there something you want to talk about? I asked, trying to sound casual despite the growing unease in my stomach. Not particularly, he said, just making some organizational changes. Organizational changes? I repeated. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm taking a more active role in managing our household affairs, he replied, settling into his chair with a cup of coffee and the evening newspaper. I think it's time I started paying closer attention to the details. The way he emphasized details made my skin crawl. Adrien's entire professional life revolved around details, catching inconsistencies in testimony, noting behavioral patterns in legal proceedings, building comprehensive records that could withstand scrutiny in court. The idea that he was now applying that same methodical approach to our marriage was deeply unsettling. Over the following days, I began to notice other small changes. Mail that used to be forwarded to my email account started arriving directly to Adrien's attention. He began asking specific questions about expenses that he'd never questioned before. Most unnervingly, he started taking notes during our conversations, actual handwritten notes in a small leather notebook that he carried everywhere. "Why are you writing things down?" I demanded one evening, after catching him jotting something in the notebook during what I'd thought was a casual discussion about Isla's school schedule. "Memory aid," he said simply, not looking up from his writing. "I want to make sure I remember the important details of our conversations." "That's weird, Adrien. Normal people don't take notes during casual conversations with their spouses." He looked up at me then, and I saw that same calculating expression that had unsettled me so much at his birthday dinner. "You're right," he said quietly. "Normal spouses probably don't need to document their conversations. But then again, normal spouses probably don't have their input dismissed as irrelevant on a regular basis." The comment hit like a slap. "Are you still upset about that stupid joke I made at your birthday? Jesus, Adrien, it was just teasing. You're being incredibly sensitive about this." "Was it teasing?" he asked, his pen poised over the notebook. "Or was it an accurate description of how decisions are made in our household?" I stared at him, genuinely confused by this new version of my husband. Where was the quiet, accommodating man who had spent 9 years letting me take the lead on everything from vacation planning to major purchases? Who was this analytical stranger who spoke in legal terminology and documented our conversations like they were depositions? "I don't know what's gotten into you," I said finally, "but this whole note-taking thing is making me uncomfortable. It feels like you're building some kind of case against me." Adrien's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, a brief flash of what might have been satisfaction. "That's an interesting choice of words," he said, writing something else in the notebook. "Why would you assume I'm building a case against you? Is there something you think I might find if I started looking closely at our relationship dynamics?" The question hung in the air, like smoke from birthday candles, and for the first time in our marriage, I found myself wondering what exactly Adrien might discover if he really did start examining our relationship with the same scrutiny he brought to his professional work. The thought was more terrifying than I wanted to admit. While Adrien was busy playing amateur detective at home, I was finding solace and excitement in an entirely different kind of attention. My relationship with Rowan Beck, the regional HR director, and my direct supervisor, had evolved from professional mentorship to something much more personal over the past 6 months. What had started as late-night strategy sessions and business dinners had gradually transformed into stolen moments in his downtown condo and carefully orchestrated overnight conferences that existed only in our shared calendar system. Rowan was everything Adrien wasn't: confident, decisive, commanding. He was 42, divorced, and carried himself with the kind of authority that made people listen when he spoke. When I was with him, I felt like the sophisticated, powerful woman I'd always believed myself to be, rather than the frustrated wife of a court stenographer who spent his evenings taking notes about our conversations, like some kind of obsessive paralegal. "You deserve better than this," Rowan would tell me during our clandestine meetings at his glass-walled corner office after hours. "You're brilliant, ambitious, capable of so much more than playing house with someone who doesn't appreciate your potential." These conversations fed something deep and hungry in my soul. Finally, here was someone who saw me the way I saw myself, as a woman who deserved to be in control, whose opinions mattered, whose intelligence and charm were properly valued. With Rowan, I didn't have to justify my need to make decisions or explain why I found Adrien's passive acceptance of my leadership both necessary and slightly contemptible. The physical aspect of our relationship had developed naturally from the emotional connection. Late nights reviewing personnel files had turned into intimate dinners, which had evolved into passionate encounters in his downtown condo. The risk of it all, the possibility of being discovered, the thrill of maintaining elaborate deceptions, only made it more intoxicating. I became an expert at managing the logistics of the affair. I deleted calendar invitations from my phone immediately after accepting them, created elaborate cover stories about client meetings and training sessions, and used cash for any expenses that might leave a digital trail. I thought I was being incredibly clever, maintaining perfect operational security while indulging in the kind of romance that made me feel alive in ways my marriage never had. What I didn't realize was that Adrien's new obsession with details extended far beyond our household finances and conversation documentation. His background in data analysis, combined with his court stenographer's eye for inconsistencies, made him uniquely qualified to spot the patterns I thought I was hiding so expertly. The first crack in my carefully constructed deception came on a Tuesday evening when I returned home from what I'd told Adrien was a mandatory HR training session. I found him sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, surrounded by printed documents and that damned leather notebook. "How was your training?" he asked without looking up from his screen. "Fine," I said, dropping my purse on the counter and heading for the refrigerator. "Boring compliance stuff, mostly. Sexual harassment policies, documentation requirements, that sort of thing." "Interesting," he said, making a note in his book. "What hotel was it at?" The question caught me off guard. I told him it was at a hotel conference center, but I couldn't remember which one I'd specified in my cover story. The Marriott downtown," I said, hoping I sounded casual. "The Marriott downtown," he repeated, writing it down. "And this ran until what time?" "Why are you interrogating me?" I asked, irritation flaring. "It's just work training, Adrien. Not exactly riveting dinner conversation." "I'm not interrogating you," he said calmly. "I'm just interested in your day. Is that not allowed anymore?" There was something in his tone that made me look at him more carefully. He was still focused on his laptop screen, but I could see the reflection of what looked like a spreadsheet with multiple columns of data. Even from my angle, I could make out timestamps, locations, and what appeared to be cross-referenced information. "What are you working on?" I asked, moving closer to try to get a better look. He closed the laptop smoothly. "Just some analysis for a case at work," he said. "Nothing that would interest you." But as he gathered his papers, I caught a glimpse of one of the printed documents. It looked like a router log or some kind of network activity report. I saw my name highlighted in yellow, along with timestamps and what appeared to be device identification numbers. Are you monitoring my internet usage? I asked, my voice rising with a mixture of outrage and panic. I'm not monitoring anything, he said, his tone remaining maddeningly calm. I'm simply reviewing the data that's automatically generated by our home network. It's all publicly available information, really. Anyone with basic technical knowledge could access it. That's creepy as hell, Adrien. Normal husbands don't spy on their wives' internet activity. Normal wives don't usually have anything to hide, he replied, meeting my eyes for the first time since I'd come home. Do you have something to hide, Calanthe? The way he said my full name, with that same clinical precision I'd heard in his voice during our recent conversations, made my blood run cold. This wasn't the passive, accommodating husband I'd grown accustomed to managing. This was someone else entirely. Someone who spoke with the authority of evidence and documentation rather than emotion or accusation. I don't have anything to hide, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I could hear how defensive they sounded. I just think it's weird and invasive for you to be analyzing my online activity like I'm some kind of criminal. Criminal is an interesting word choice, he said, opening his notebook and writing something down. Why would you jump to criminal activity? I never suggested anything illegal was happening. I stared at him, realizing that somehow, in the span of a few weeks, the power dynamic in our relationship had shifted in ways I didn't fully understand. Adrien was no longer the quiet observer who accepted my leadership without question. He had become something far more dangerous, a methodical investigator who was apparently building some kind of comprehensive case about my behavior. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the familiar sound of his typing from the home office, I found myself wondering just how much he actually knew, and more importantly, what he planned to do with whatever information he was so carefully collecting. The answer to that question would come sooner than I expected, and in ways I never could have imagined. As Adrien's strange new behavior continued, I realized I needed to take proactive steps to protect myself and secure my position in what was beginning to feel like an undeclared war. If my husband wanted to play games with documentation and analysis, I had advantages he couldn't match, starting with our daughter Isla, who had always been closer to me than to her emotionally distant father. At 7 years old, Isla was bright, articulate, and naturally inclined to please the parent who spent more time with her. Since I managed most of her daily routine, school pickup, homework supervision, playdates, and bedtime stories, it made sense that she would see me as the primary authority figure in our household. All I needed to do was help her understand that dynamic more clearly. You know Daddy loves you very much, I told her one evening as I tucked her into bed. But sometimes grown-ups have different ideas about how to handle important decisions. In our family, Mommy usually knows what's best because I spend more time thinking about these things. Isla nodded solemnly, her dark eyes, so much like Adrien's, fixed on my face with complete trust. Like when Daddy wanted to get pizza for dinner but you said we should have salad. Exactly, I said, smoothing her hair. Daddy doesn't always think about what's healthiest or best for our family. That's why Mommy makes most of the important choices. Can you remember that? These conversations became part of our regular routine. I wasn't coaching her to lie exactly. I was simply helping her understand the natural order of our household hierarchy. When the school counselor called to schedule a meeting about Isla's recent behavioral changes, I saw it as an opportunity to establish a clear narrative about our family dynamics. Isla seems a bit anxious lately, Mrs. Patterson, the school counselor explained, as we sat in her small, sunlit office, surrounded by children's artwork and motivational posters. She's been making some interesting comments about her home life that I thought we should discuss. What kind of comments? I asked, though I felt confident that anything Isla had said would support my position as the responsible, engaged parent. She's mentioned several times that her father doesn't get to decide things, and that you make all the important family decisions. When I asked her how she feels about that, she seemed confused, like she wasn't sure if that was normal or not. I nodded sympathetically. Isla's at an age where she's starting to notice that different families have different ways of organizing themselves. In our household, I do tend to handle most of the decision-making because I have more flexibility in my schedule and more experience with certain types of planning. I see, Mrs. Patterson said, making notes in Isla's file. And how does her father feel about this arrangement? Adrien is very supportive, I said smoothly. He recognizes that I have strengths in areas where he's less confident. It's really quite collaborative, even though from a child's perspective it might look like I'm the one making all the choices. What I didn't know was that Mrs. Patterson had already spoken with Adrien separately, and that their conversation had painted a very different picture of our family dynamics. I also didn't realize that Adrien had specifically requested to be included in any discussions about Isla's emotional well-being, or that he had been documenting her conflicting statements about our household with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. The truth about his involvement became clear a few days later when Mrs. Patterson called to schedule a follow-up meeting, this time requesting that both parents attend together. I think it would be beneficial for Isla if we could all get on the same page about some of the mixed messages she seems to be receiving at home, Mrs. Patterson explained when I called to ask why Adrien's presence was necessary. Mixed messages, I repeated. I'm not sure what you mean. We're very consistent in our parenting approach. That's exactly what I'd like to discuss with both of you, she said diplomatically. Sometimes children pick up on subtleties that parents don't realize they're communicating. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday afternoon. As the date approached, I found myself feeling increasingly anxious about what Adrien might say, or how he might try to undermine the narrative I'd worked so carefully to establish. His recent behavior suggested that he was no longer the passive, agreeable partner I'd grown accustomed to managing. My concerns proved to be well-founded. When we sat down in Mrs. Patterson's office, Adrien arrived with a folder of documents and that omnipresent leather notebook. He looked like he was preparing for a deposition rather than a casual conversation about our daughter's school adjustment. I've been documenting some concerning patterns in Isla's statements, he said without preamble, opening his folder and extracting several typed pages. She's been giving contradictory accounts of our family decision-making process, and I believe she may be receiving coaching that's causing her emotional confusion. I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment. Coaching? Are you seriously suggesting that I'm coaching our daughter? She's 7 years old, Adrien. She doesn't need coaching to understand how our family works. Actually, Mrs. Patterson interjected gently, that's part of what I wanted to discuss. When I spoke with Isla individually last week, she gave a very different account of your family dynamics than what she's shared in previous conversations. She seemed uncertain about which version was correct, which suggests she may be feeling pressure to present different narratives to different people. Adrien opened his notebook and began reading from his notes. On March 15th, Isla told her after-school care provider that Daddy doesn't decide things in our house. On March 18th, she told her soccer coach that Mommy says Daddy's ideas aren't very good. But when Mrs. Patterson spoke with her privately, on March 22nd, Isla said she wished her parents would talk to each other more about important stuff and that she felt confused about why Daddy seemed sad lately. The precision of his documentation was staggering and deeply unsettling. He had dates, quotes, and sources for conversations I didn't even know he was aware of. More troubling was the clear implication that our daughter was struggling with the messages I'd been sharing with her about our family hierarchy. I think what we're seeing, Mrs. Patterson said carefully, is a child who's trying to navigate conflicting expectations about how she should perceive her parents' relationship. Isla clearly loves both of you, but she seems to be receiving different messages about your respective roles and authority within the family. As the meeting continued, I realized that Adrien had somehow managed to turn what I'd intended as a simple documentation of our natural family dynamics into evidence of my inappropriate influence over our daughter's perceptions. His methodical approach, combined with his obvious emotional investment in Isla's well-being, made him appear like the concerned, observant parent, while I looked like someone who was manipulating a child for my own purposes. By the time we left Mrs. Patterson's office, I felt like I'd been outmaneuvered in ways I still didn't fully understand. Adrien had taken my own strategy, using Isla's statements to support a particular narrative, and turned it against me by demonstrating that I was actively shaping those statements rather than simply allowing them to emerge naturally. As we drove home in tense silence, I found myself wondering how many other aspects of our relationship Adrien was analyzing with the same devastating precision. More importantly, I began to suspect that whatever he was building toward, Isla's well-being was going to be central to his ultimate strategy, and that my attempts to secure her loyalty might have actually provided him with the most damaging evidence of all. By early April, I had convinced myself that the best defense against Adrien's increasingly strange behavior was a strong offense. If he wanted to play games with documentation and analysis, I would beat him at his own game by taking control of the narrative before he could use whatever he was collecting against me. I decided to file for divorce first. My reasoning seemed sound at the time. I had been the primary decision-maker in our household for 9 years. I managed most of our social relationships, and I had a strong professional network through my HR position. If I filed first, I could frame the dissolution of our marriage as the natural result of Adrien's recent obsessive behavior and emotional distance. I could present myself as the concerned parent who was trying to protect our daughter from an increasingly unstable father who had begun monitoring our internet usage and taking notes during family conversations. I consulted with a family law attorney, Jennifer Walsh, who had been recommended by my mother. During our initial meeting, I painted a picture of a marriage that had deteriorated due to my husband's controlling tendencies and paranoid behavior. He's become obsessed with documenting our conversations, I explained, sitting in her downtown office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He monitors our internet usage, he takes notes about everything I say and do, and he started questioning my work schedule and social activities in ways that feel invasive and inappropriate. Jennifer nodded sympathetically as she took notes. That does sound concerning. Has there been any history of controlling behavior, or is this a recent development? It's definitely gotten worse lately, I said. But looking back, I can see patterns of emotional manipulation and passive-aggressive behavior that I probably should have recognized sooner. He's always been the type of person who withdraws and sulks when he doesn't get his way, but now it's escalated to actual surveillance. What about your daughter? Jennifer asked. How is she handling the tension in the household? That's actually my biggest concern, I said, leaning forward to emphasize my point. Isla has started to notice that her father is acting strangely, and I'm worried about the impact this is having on her emotional development. She's been asking me why Daddy seems angry all the time, and why he writes things down when we talk. I think she needs stability, and right now Adrien isn't providing that. Jennifer spent the next hour walking me through the divorce process, explaining how custody determinations would be made, and what kind of evidence would be most helpful in demonstrating my fitness as the primary parent. I left her office feeling confident that I had taken the right approach and that I would be able to maintain control of the situation. I filed the papers on a Wednesday morning and had them served to Adrien at his workplace that afternoon. I thought the public setting would prevent him from having any kind of emotional outburst, and I wanted his colleagues to see that I was the one taking decisive action to resolve our marital problems. What I didn't expect was his reaction when he came home that evening. Interesting timing, he said calmly, setting the divorce papers on the kitchen counter next to his ever-present notebook. I was wondering when you'd make this move. What's that supposed to mean? I asked, though his lack of surprise was unsettling. It means I've been expecting this, he said, opening his laptop and pulling up what looked like a calendar application. Based on the pattern of your behavior over the past several weeks, filing for divorce was the logical next step in your strategy. My strategy? I repeated. Adrien, this isn't some kind of game. Our marriage is falling apart because you've become obsessed with controlling and monitoring everything I do. He looked at me with that same analytical expression I'd grown to hate. That's an interesting characterization, he said, making a note in his book. Would you say that's an accurate description of our relationship dynamics over the past 9 years, or just the past few weeks? The question caught me off guard. What are you talking about? I'm talking about control, he said, his voice remaining maddeningly calm. I'm talking about who has actually been making unilateral decisions in our household, who has been monitoring and managing the other person's activities, and who has been using manipulation to maintain power in our relationship. Before I could respond, he opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a comprehensive timeline, starting from our wedding day and extending to the present. Every entry was meticulously documented with dates, times, and detailed descriptions of incidents I had completely forgotten or never thought twice about. The birthday dinner humiliation was there, of course, but so were dozens of other moments spanning nearly a decade. Times I had dismissed his opinions in front of friends, instances where I had made major financial decisions without consulting him, occasions when I had changed plans or made commitments on his behalf without asking. This is insane, I whispered, scrolling through what appeared to be hundreds of entries. You've been documenting our entire marriage. I've been documenting a pattern of controlling and manipulative behavior, he corrected. The question is whether you recognize that pattern and whether you understand who has actually been the controlling party in our relationship. As I continued reading, I realized that Adrien had not only documented my behavior, but had also collected supporting evidence for many of his claims. There were screenshots of emails where I had changed his commitments without consulting him, bank records showing financial decisions I had made unilaterally, and even audio recordings of conversations where I had dismissed his input or overruled his preferences. You've been recording our conversations, I asked, my voice rising with panic and outrage. I've been protecting myself, he said simply, and protecting our daughter from the psychological damage caused by living in a household where one parent consistently undermines and dismisses the other. The timeline was devastating in its comprehensiveness and clinical precision. What I had always seen as natural leadership and efficient decision-making, Adrien had documented as a systematic pattern of emotional abuse and coercive control. Every instance where I had taken charge, every moment where I had overruled his preferences, every time I had spoken for him or made decisions on his behalf, it was all there, presented with the kind of methodical thoroughness that could only come from someone with his professional background in legal documentation. But the timeline was just the beginning. As Adrien walked me through his evidence, I realized that he had also been investigating my relationship with Rowan. He had router logs showing my devices connecting to networks at Rowan's condo building, credit card records that contradicted my claimed whereabouts during work training sessions, and even hotel keycard data that he had somehow obtained through what he described as publicly available records requests. You've been spying on me, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew how weak they sounded in the face of his documentation. I've been gathering evidence of adultery and financial misconduct, he replied, which, according to the divorce papers you filed today, should be relevant to custody and asset distribution decisions. As the full scope of his investigation became clear, I realized that my decision to file first had been exactly what Adrien was expecting, and that he had been prepared for this moment for months. Every move I had made, every strategy I had employed, every attempt to control the narrative had been anticipated and countered by someone who understood legal processes far better than I did. The man I had dismissed as passive and weak had spent months building an airtight case against me, and I had just handed him the perfect opportunity to present it in court. The process server found me at work on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after I had filed for divorce. I was in the middle of what I thought was a private strategy session with Rowan, going over my legal options and discussing how to present my case in the most favorable light when there was a firm knock on his glass-walled office door. "Calanthe Morrow?" the woman asked, holding a thick manila envelope. "Yes," I replied, though something about her professional demeanor and the way my colleagues had suddenly found reasons to walk past Rowan's office made my stomach clench with dread. "You've been served," she said, handing me the envelope and producing a clipboard for my signature. The weight of the envelope suggested far more than a simple response to my divorce filing. As I signed for the documents, I was acutely aware that half the HR department was watching through the glass walls, pretending to work while obviously straining to see what was happening. "What is it?" Rowan asked after the process server left, his voice tight with concern. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and found myself staring at a counter-petition that was unlike anything I had expected. The document was over 40 pages long, meticulously organized, and supported by an appendix of evidence that made my simple divorce filing look amateurish by comparison. The allegations were devastating and comprehensive. Adrien was seeking primary custody of Isla based on documented evidence of parental alienation and emotional manipulation. He was requesting a forensic accounting of our marital assets, claiming that I had engaged in financial misconduct and hidden marital property. Most damaging of all, he was seeking spousal support and attorney's fees, positioning himself as the financially disadvantaged spouse who had been systematically excluded from household decision-making. But it was the evidence appendix that truly took my breath away. Everything was there, the timeline of controlling behavior I had seen on his laptop, but now expanded and cross-referenced with supporting documentation. Bank records, email communications, audio recordings, witness statements from family members, and even a detailed analysis of my work schedule that clearly demonstrated the impossibility of the overtime hours I had been claiming. "Jesus Christ," Rowan muttered, reading over my shoulder. "How did he get all of this?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Check your email." Lynn Beck. Lynn Beck was Rowan's wife. With growing horror, I opened my email to find a message with the subject line, "We need to talk." "I know about the affair," the message read. "I've been documenting everything for 2 months, and I'm prepared to cooperate with your husband's attorney if needed. I'd prefer we resolve this without involving your employer's HR department, but that's up to you." Rowan went pale as he read it on my phone. "She knows," I whispered. "How?" he asked, already calculating damage to his career and marriage. Then another email arrived from Adrien's attorney, requesting a meeting to avoid extensive discovery or public proceedings. It was polite, but the threat was obvious. They had enough to ruin me, and this was my one chance to negotiate. Over the next days, Adrien's preparation surfaced everywhere. Witness statements, dated notes, family members describing my dismissive behavior, even my own mother unintentionally backing his narrative. The custody evaluation turned into disaster when Isla broke down and admitted I'd pressured her to criticize her father. HR opened an inquiry. Hotel records, charges, photos, everything landed on the company's desk. Rowan and I were suspended. By early June, I was sitting in the courthouse waiting room, realizing I'd underestimated Adrien for 9 years. When the judge awarded him primary custody and ordered supervised visits for me, it hit hard. His quiet documentation wasn't weakness, it was strategy.